are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to a very special edition of In the Weeds with Jimmy Young. And this week, we're very excited to welcome in the green nurse from Vermont herself. It's Jessilyn Dolan. Jessilyn, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
And I'm really excited to share some of the amazing things that you've done in the state of Vermont. And the titles you have are very impressive, including on the board of directors of the American Cannabis Nurses Association. I think that's terrific. We'll certainly start there. First of all, let's get into cannabis. And I always ask people, what is your cannabis story? How did you first get introduced to this magical plant?
Well, I guess I was introduced at a very young age. I grew up in what some would say kind of a hippie family, went to a lot of Grateful Dead shows along the way growing up. So to me, it was a normal thing growing up. I was taught that the cops might not be okay with it, but that the Bible actually said it was okay. And my great grandmother was from Canada and used to go up once a year and come back and bring her Canadian herbs. And she was an herbalist and would treat us with her natural medicine. So I grew up pretty different as far as not having that stigma, but understanding that this is great and this is helpful, but we got to be careful with the cops. So I went about it a little differently. And as a teenager, one of my best friends growing up had cancer, unfortunately. So I also got to experience the medical side where her mom was a nurse giving her pills of THC to help during her chemo. So
there you go. So that's your introduction to cannabis as a medicine. How did you get introduced to nursing and why did you choose that as a profession and a career?
Good question. That too is kind of opposite to many people. I first went into herbology and alternative medicine. So right at 18 out of high school, I studied herbology with the famous Rosemary Gladstar, went to massage school and became a body worker and energy worker. And doing that for a good decade or so, I did a lot of birth work. So I was a doula, childbirth educator. I swore up and down I wanted to be a nurse midwife. So I went back to nursing school as a second career while I owned a yoga studio and was a single mom and wanted to piece it all together. So I brought my holistic background into nursing, where most people start in nursing and realize we need to do something different and something else, and come into that holistic healthcare kind of profession and intertwining that later on. So I did that a little bit opposite as well, which, as you can imagine, was a little challenging to go through nursing school as an older adult and have that kind of holistic background behind me.
Well, it sounds like you have a lot to offer others and you enjoy sharing some of your knowledge and your holistic knowledge with others. And I think that's why people have so much respect for nurses, especially these days during a worldwide pandemic.
Absolutely. This is the 19th year nurses are voted the most trusted profession out there, and now more than ever.
Absolutely. And utmost respect for single moms out there, too, because that's a job that a lot of people don't recognize is probably 10 times harder than just being a single parent. And that is the toughest job. So there you go.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about the difference now between organic cannabis and regular cannabis. Why are you so enamored with organics when it comes to the cannabis plant?
Oh, that's a loaded question. So I'll try
That's what I'm here for you. You know, that's why I have this cheat sheet. You know that, right?
That's awesome. So overall, it's about consumer safety and giving access to clean medicine. But when we want to make medicine and use it consistently and help people, we also can't trample on the earth at the same time. So when I look at why we want it organic, it's not just for the patient, it's actually for the planet too. So I'm a big proponent for sustainable and regenerative farming more than just organic, which is using great healthy inputs, but maybe they're not paying attention to the plastic bottles that they're using, or 10 years down the road, have they been feeding their soil rather than just depleting it? So when I look at organic, I kind of go above and beyond the product and the patient and also to the earth. But of course, as a nurse, the big one we work with and work for are the patients, right? And if it's not organic, it's not clean and it's not medicine. So to me, if it's not organic, it's not medicine. If it's not affordable, it's not medicine. If we're hurting the earth, it's not medicine for anyone in that larger perspective. But also when you talk about organic, you kind of need to understand what organic means, and not everybody does. That beautiful USDA little label on your bottle is a marketing term. It doesn't actually prove that there's any more consumer safety. What we're hoping is that these are ethical, wonderful stewards of the land kind of farmers with these organic certifications. But the reality is that that doesn't hold enough weight. A perfect example is hemp products right now. With the 2018 Farm Bill, hemp can be certified organic with some state programs. Not every state program is willing to do it yet. So that looks beautiful and great to see that little marketing logo on that CBD bottle, but that doesn't mean they've had any soil testing, any lab testing on the plant material, or any final product testing to ensure that it's actually clean. And when I mean clean, that's free of mold and mildew, heavy metal. So that's above and beyond just organic or just lab testing for your CBD. So that's why it's kind of a weighted topic. But overall, I joke around sometimes, you can call me obnoxiously organic, but the truth is we need to look at organic as a way bigger discussion than just that little O and that little marketing label on your bottle.
I think everybody in Vermont has an organic kind of existence. I mean, I don't know if that's something that they make sure you have as you check into that state, but that's one of the greener states. It's it's in the Green Mountains, right? So it seems like everybody in that state has that kind of appreciation of the earth, right?
I think more than most other states. Absolutely. Yes.
There you go. All right. Fair enough. I want to talk to you about the plant as plant medicine. And this is one of the things that really bothers me when I follow news stories or talk to people about this. A lot of people still look at this as a drug. And I try to correct them and say, it's really plant medicine, just like you would have a plant diet if you happen to be vegan. And it takes away some of that stigma that's been attached to that plant ever since Prohibition. So, but it also can be used recreationally. How do you discern how to explain to people, look, this is a plant medicine and you need to respect it that way? Yes, you can use it recreationally for fun too, but it still all comes down to that individual interaction with that plant. So what might work for you in your body may not be the same that works for me. This is one of the most challenging things that everybody in this business has to deal with. How do you deal with that?
You know, like a lot of other things in the nursing and holistic care world, there's a play on words, right? I always talk to people about the words they use. I deal with addiction and opioid use disorder. We don't want to call someone an addict. We say they're struggling with addiction. So it's really all a play on words. So when you think about what is a drug is something that changes using chemicals in your body. So caffeine is a drug, sugar is a drug, plant medicine is a drug, but that word drug has a bad connotation, like you said. So we try to remove that word because of that negative connotation and change it with medicine. Then we're bringing in the whole medical component and the pharmaceutical side, which also has bad connotations in that verbal sense for many people. So really, I think just like plant medicine is individualized, so is the language and the words that we use and we're comfortable using. So I try to tailor my words a little bit depending who I'm speaking with. If I'm talking to a doctor, I am going to call it medicine and a drug because that's what they know of it. Right. If I'm talking to someone that's maybe a little bit nervous and wants more information and is deciding if they want to try cannabis, I'm going to talk to them either using that plant medicine terminology to help bring it down to the level of chamomile in your tea, right? Or if they're coming from an allopathic mindset and they think Prozac's the only way to go, I am going to talk to them about, hey, Prozac absolutely can change your body and your system, but let's talk about the endocannabinoid system and how there's a plant that is made to work on this system. But you know what? You don't actually have a Prozac system, do you? So I really think it's an individual conversation, and you have to a little bit know how to navigate your crowd with the words that you're using. And unfortunately, sometimes regardless what you say and what words you choose, you're going to make somebody super happy and you're going to make somebody else unhappy. And that's the history of this plant when we look at, both stigma, the words around it. And gosh, if we want to get into the history of the plant, that's a whole discussion of itself with the racial disparities and the profiling and the injustice that's been done. So I think that's where we also look at marijuana and cannabis. And right now is the time for us to start dialing in our language and talking to people at that level to understand, yes, this is a drug, but that doesn't mean that's a bad word. Drug also means medicine. Plant medicine is also natural and something you can grow and pick out of your garden like we did 3,000 years ago. So again, you ask great questions, but they're big encompassing questions that I think a lot of people will have very different opinions about.
Right. And therein lies why a talk show host likes to throw those things out there so it engages people. And a lot of people are going to have different opinions. Mm-hmm. You've been advocating for this plant in Vermont now for some time. And talk to me a little bit about the history of the cannabis advocacy movement in Vermont to get it to be I'm pretty sure it was the first legislature to make it legal in the United States. Now other legislatures are finally figuring it out. But how challenging was it to educate your elected officials about some of the benefits of this plant?
I think in Vermont, they've been a lot more open to it than many other states. For us, I don't think it was so much educating about the medicinal use of it. There wasn't question about that. It's been more the battle and the fight to get to the recreational market to actually have adult use. We've had medical for a long time. The program hasn't changed much since it started about a decade and a half ago. And unfortunately, our medical program needs a lot of help and needs to be cleaned up, and pun intended, because it's not clean cannabis. But when it comes to the recreational market, that they've really taken their time on, and they're trying to approach it differently. Whether that's going to work out wonderfully or not is still yet to be determined.
They're choosing commissioners in the regulatory committee right now. Do you know some of the people that are up for those jobs?
I do. I know a couple of them, and I was one of the close in the running right till the end. I have too many conflicts, unfortunately, I absolutely agree with a lot of what I'm doing might pose some ethical conflicts for not only the state, but myself personally. So there's going to be a 3-person cannabis control board. And with that, they will hold a lot of power. My hope is that we're going to put the right people in the right spots. I do think and hope that I will be on the advocacy board. So I'll be able to be a big part of that, that mouth, I guess, the education when it comes to helping them.
You'll be talking about policies from an educational standpoint. I would think you'd be a great member of that advisory board. They'd want you on that, which I think is great. You mentioned something just a minute ago about the medical program. Tell me, what are some of the issues? You said you've had it around there for 15 years or so. So what are some of the issues with the medical program in Vermont that you'd like to see improved on?
Well, the biggest issue is that the lab testing. So that's something I harp on, lab testing. Even if we grow organic, we don't know if we grew mold when we were growing it, right? We don't know if there's bugs on it. So we don't know if it pulled out heavy metals from the soil. So as organic as we want to be, that's great, but that doesn't give us consumer protection. And a medical program needs to provide that layer of transparency and assurancy. In Vermont, they do in-house rather than third-party independent lab testing. They only test for THC and CBD. So again, that's the least of my concerns, because the general idea is take a low dose and increase really slow. More so than I want to actually know this is lab tested, that it doesn't have those molds or those mycotoxins or those heavy metals or pesticides or anything that's going to harm you. So that's the biggest thing I think is wrong with the medical program. Then when we look at the overall structure, we're only allowed to grow 2 plants in flower for a severe or chronic medical condition. That's not enough. We are only allowed to caregive for 1 patient. So I'm a caregiver and I grow for another nurse, but I'm only allowed to grow for 1 other person. We don't have reciprocity, so we're not very nice to other state patients that want to come into Vermont. So yeah, that's just a few of them. There's definitely...
That's quite a list. That's quite a list. You know, one of the biggest, it's a stumbling block. When I read about the other states and the legislatures getting involved and making new rules, and while you're right, I think the majority, I think the last poll was something like 90% of Americans recognize the medicinal value of this plant. Okay, that's great. But you made a great point. If you are sick and you need this plant, you want to grow it as opposed to have to buy it, since after all, even if you have health insurance, for the most part, you're not going to be able to get reimbursed for any of that. You should have the right to grow your own medicine. Home grow is missing from the New Jersey laws. How would you sell the New Jersey legislature on, or even New York, which is contemplating it now too, to allow home grow, especially for medicinal purposes?
Well, and I'm glad you bring that up, because I sometimes forget that I'm frustrated with our 2 plant count, but that's way more than other states have. So Thank you for the reminder. You know, to me, it comes down to both the cleanliness and the affordability. We know the price of cannabis is too expensive, that a lot of patients cannot afford it. And especially here in Vermont, if we're not doing that lab testing, then we're not giving them any kind of consumer safety. So at least they're taking it upon themselves to know what they're putting into the plant and know what it looks like, to see if it's clean. And hopefully that's more affordable. I do like to remind people that want to grow that it's not as easy as some people would like it to be. So and it can be a little bit costly for some as well. So not everybody can grow clean, affordable cannabis, but if they're given the opportunity to try, you can learn and get better at it. And I think it's so important to always mention the healing aspects that come with growing itself. So just getting somebody to be empowered and part of their own treatment plan by getting their hands on the plant rather than going to a store, picking up a bottle of pills like we do at the pharmacy, is a very different, empowering patient experience and way of helping us heal ourselves.
That's right. And someone like myself who really has a black thumb, not a green thumb, a black thumb, I get scared. In fact, I had to put a couple of plants down that I tried to save, a couple of hibiscus plants. You know, they don't like the cold. They like to be out on the deck in the sun. And we took them in at the end of the season, but it just didn't work out. And I got to tell you, I definitely felt an emotional down when I had to, put them down, if you will. And the other thing that I learned about plants, especially the cannabis plant, is only deal with the female plant, because that's the magic one, right?
Yes. And I love that about cannabis as well. And growing that is there's not a lot of things you grow where it's so important and that the female is the power of the plant. So that's another reason I resonate with cannabis a lot.
Absolutely. And I know you call yourself the Green Nurse of Vermont, correct?
I actually don't use that term. Green nurses in Massachusetts kind of own, I think, that term for the most part. I've had the email green nurse for, almost a decade at this point. I call myself usually a cannabis nurse, herbalist, farmer, activist. It kind of can continue to go on.
Well, I was going to try and bring in our pal and our affiliate partner, Sherry Tutkus, the Green Nurse in Massachusetts. That's her show. And I know you've appeared with Sherry. And were you on with Nurse Mark too?
Yes, actually, the green nurses are affiliates for my CBD hemp company. So, Nurse Grown Organics is a clean green certified hemp company that I have a product line, and the green nurses came on to be an affiliate because they want to share really high quality cannabis products. So.
Yeah, it really is. And Sherry's one of my favorite people in the Massachusetts cannabis space. And I've known her for as long as I've been in it, which is just over about 2.5 years now. And I'm so thrilled that we here at Pro Cannabis Media are going to be sharing her shows with the public. And I know that you appear in one of them, so
Yes.
that'll be a double bonus for you.
Absolutely.
Jessilyn, is there one thing about the cannabis plant that you still would like to learn about? Like, I love asking people, did you know cannabis does blank? How would you fill that in? And how would you enlighten people who think they know enough about this plant? I know it gets me high and makes me feel better, but there's so many other little things about it. And you mentioned the two cannabinoids, THC and CBD. What are there? Another 100 in the plant that they're still discovering, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I guess if that was my sentence, I would say cannabis teaches you patience. I am still working on patience, from growing to crafting medicine to patience on that legislative activism level, and how long it takes to get bills into session and get them approved and to change minds of politicians. So to me, cannabis is a big lesson, and I continue to learn more and more on patience.
It really is a fascinating plant and a fascinating industry. And we really, I pinch myself sometimes. I'm like, I'm part of a historic movement here. This is the end of prohibition. A lot of people are finding out that this plant can actually improve their lives. The wellness community is accepting CBD, and they're even understanding the entourage effect, the importance of actually having a little more THC in it than what hemp is defined as. Let's talk a little bit about that entourage effect. What, in your experience, what is the magic ratio, if you will, between CBD, CBN, and THC, or have we figured out what that magical formula is yet?
I think that's extremely individualized, but the overall idea I tell and teach people is what I've noticed anecdotally time and time again over the years, if not decades, is when we're trying, say, CBD, and it's just not enough, oftentimes we just need a little more THC to the mix. And same thing for somebody that's been using THC, especially for someone who's been using it consistently for a long time and aren't getting all the results they want. Adding a little bit of CBD can really be kind of that connection that our body needs to make everything work that much better. So what I've found is people tend to resonate one way or the other. And if it's not working great, let's add a little bit of that other piece in and see where it goes. So that's what I tend to recommend and see most of the time. When we look at that entourage effect, that's exactly what we're talking about, is we don't want THC or CBD or even CBN or CBG isolates. We want that whole plant. And by whole, I mean a plant that energetically, synergistically is together. That is plant medicine. So when I talk to people about the entourage effect, I like to talk about extraction methods and how we actually get that plant to be into medicine, and to know the methods we're using to keep that energy medicine intact. If we're taking a plant and cutting it all apart and piecing it back together, well, that's not the definition of holism. When we look at holistic, or we look at whole plant medicine or entourage effect, we want to come back to our herbal roots and Mother Earth and Mother Nature, and keep that plant together for that entourage effect.
I ask this question especially of cannabis nurses or doctors that are cannabis certified for your medical card or whatever. There are times now when you experiment with non-smoking titration methods, i.e. edibles, concentrates, tinctures. And of course, we all have to self-medicate to see what that dosing is. And sometimes you get a little too much, and it's extremely uncomfortable. As a nurse, how do you counter that? There's so many different there's so many different tips that you can offer, but I'm always interested to hear what you might recommend just in case you get a little too much in your system.
And typically we're talking about THC when there's too much in our system, right?
Right.
So
the intoxicating chemical is THC. Exactly.
Honestly, the first step is hopefully don't get to that point. That's why we talk about going low and slow, because you take somebody that's cannabis naive or new to it and you give them a big dose, they might be miserable to the point they never want to try it again. So we're trying to avoid that. If we can't avoid that, oftentimes when we do see somebody who's taken way too much ingested edibles, THC, it's somebody that has a little THC experience. So whether it's somebody that's very new or somebody that has a little experience with cannabis, we're going to go through the same basic concept of let's hydrate and get some food in our belly. Let's relax, be with somebody that makes us feel comfortable, put on a movie, basically taking someone that's almost in an uncomfortable, scary situation and being that voice of reason, that calming person, that support team that they really need. Now, some people absolutely say to add some THC, and I think that's a great idea. That's not going to hurt. But if that's a CBD with a little THC, you also have to remember, how high of a dose of CBD are you giving somebody? So I tend to just want to talk somebody through it, tell them to eat one of their favorite munchies. I know a doctor that'll always say, go for a potato or potato chips to help absorb everything in your stomach, and really just understand that you're going to be uncomfortable, but you are safe. And if you have somebody or a team of people around you to help guide you through it, it's not going to last that long.
That's right. And it is something that you will live to tell the story as well. It may not be a pleasant experience, but eventually you'll get through it. And that's a mantra that sometimes I've heard works really well. And I'll admit it worked for me the other night. Okay. So,
and really just one last thing to mention is it's all about education. I think for me, it takes almost 3 hours for an edible to actually start to work in my body. And if I didn't know that after an hour and a half, even after 45 minutes, I might take more. So some people, it kicks in within 45 minutes, an hour. Some people, it takes a really long time. So knowing, again, that individuality and taking your time to work up to that is so important.
Right. And again, that goes to a different edible product from a different dispensary too is going to be different. And so there's all sorts of self-medicating experimentation. And even those who feel like they know what they're doing sometimes overdo it, let's just say. So anyway, it's an adventure in learning about your body. It's an adventure in learning about an amazing plant. How do people find you, Jessilyn, in Vermont? Do you have a website? You have a product. Why don't you push your product a little bit?
Sure, I do. It's nursegrown.com is the website. So that's our clean, green certified Vermont hemp. I'm also on Instagram. It's nursegrown_organics. Facebook is nursegrown, I think, _organics. So yeah, that's a great way. I'm also new to LinkedIn and Twitter, so trying to learn those a little bit. But for the most part, we have our website, nursegrown.com. Feel free to also check us out on Instagram and Facebook.
There you go. That's Jessilyn Dolan, a green nurse from Vermont and an organic superstar from Vermont. So again, thank you so much for joining us, Jessilyn. We look forward to more reports from you coming from that beautiful state of Vermont. So that'll do it for another edition of In the Weeds with Jimmy Young. For our director, Dan French, I'm Jimmy Young. We'll see you next time. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first.
Pro Cannabis Media programming is available live and on demand on our Facebook page at Pro Canna Media, on Instagram at Pro Cannabis Media, on LinkedIn also at Pro Cannabis Media, on YouTube and YouTube Live on Pro Cannabis Media, Twitter at Pro Canna Media, and on twitch.tv/Pro Cannabis Media. So like, share, and subscribe to all of our content, newsletters, and shows live or on demand.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.